Well, fellas, it's officially a series now. Welcome to the second installment of the Hatsu Levels series. This time featuring Transmutation as voted by you. Out of respect for my returning viewers, as well as my own time and sanity, I'll only very briefly reintroduce the concepts and ideas underpinning this series, so as to avoid another 4 or 5 minute preamble. While I think you'll be able to follow regardless, if you are a new viewer that stumbled across this video, my advice is to start from a mission and then make your way back here. But you do you. First, Hatsu levels equal Hatsu complexity, and I believe there are two types of complexities. Innate complexity, which entails the need for advanced Nen principles innate to a particular category to be evoked and mastered in order for a Hatsu to take shape, and multi-categorical complexity, which stems from a Hatsu relying on more than one category in order to function. This installment of the series will, of course, be focused on delineating and rating the complexities of the various Nen mechanics innate to transmutation. Second, while a low-level ability is not indicative of a character's proficiency or power level, their proficiency in a particular category is indicative of the level of ability they can manifest. Third, while the primary focus is on transmutation mechanic and Hatsu levels, I will be bringing up the concepts of force, i.e. power, and accuracy, i.e. finesse, to further expound on particular Hatsu when I see merit to it. With all that said and established, let's get into it. At level 1 we have basic aura augmentation, which includes aura shaping and solidification. If you'll remember, transmutation is responsible for the basic principle of shaping one's aura. This can entail pre-Hatsu transmutation training exercises where students shape their aura into numbers, or a party trick like pip play. Aura shaping and solidification comes into play as a proper mechanic in Hatsu creation when we get to the shaping of emitted Nen beasts, for example. Here it acts as a supporting mechanic essential to giving the emitted constructs a constant and stable shape. If we conceptualize aura as water, you can imagine emission as a hose allowing you to spray water at long range, while transmutation as the vessel to hold said water. That said though, thus far we've talked about aura shaping in terms of party tricks and supporting mechanics. Is basic aura augmentation on its own enough to account for a whole Hatsu though? Yes, it is. Sadaso's invisible hand. Sadaso utilizes transmutation's most basic property of aura shaping and solidification to mold his aura into the vague appearance of a hand, with which he can then grab and potentially choke out or crush his opponents and/or literal borderline toddlers. This is the transmutation equivalent of an enhancer like Uvo using Ko as a full-blown Hatsu. As simple as it can get. Now, the reason behind the vast disparity between the tactical nuke that is Big Bang Impact and the glorified kidnapping aid that is Invisible Hand is their massive difference in force or power. A simple Hatsu like this, using the same gimmick, could be made to be genuinely terrifying in the hands, pun very much intended, of someone more skilled than Sadaso. With increased aura output, he'd be able to create a multitude of hands at once. With increased accuracy, he'd be able to quickly and deftly control them all at once, and with an increase in force, each would be at least as strong as Sadaso's singular hand was. As I said at the beginning, a Hatsu's level has no correlation to its effectiveness. A simple Hatsu like Uvo's can make you question your choices in life, while a comparatively much more complex one like Chitu's will make you pity the fool. Oh wow, I think I may have spent more time on Sadaso than Togashi did. Moving on. At level 2, we have a more innately complex application of transmutation, which I'm on originally choosing to term advanced aura augmentation. While basic aura augmentation facilitates aura shaping and solidification, advanced aura augmentation entails shaping and solidifying aura to give it various properties without crossing the line of actually changing its nature. Think Machi's threads or Gon's scissors. As in, while Hisoka properly transmutes his aura to have the properties of rubber and gum, what Machi and Gon do is a bit more fundamental. Instead of mimicking the properties of a substance like rubber, gum, fire, or electricity, Machi simply shapes her solidified aura in such a way where it takes the appearance and thus the properties of threads. As such, the way I see it, Machi doesn't actually transmute her aura to take on the property of threadiness. Oh wow, that's a real word. But simply shapes her aura in such a specific way so as to have it take on certain properties for which threads or stitches are the best analog. In other words, advanced aura augmentation entails the shaping of one's aura in such a manner to give it special properties without it undergoing any fundamental changes, i.e. the changes are purely morphological, let's call it. While Machi transmutes her aura into a stable, fine, thread-like shape, Gon transmutes his into a dynamic shape optimized for cutting, mimicking the appearance and functionality of a blade. Now, there is an argument to be made that both of these should still constitute a level 1 Hatsu, and the only difference between them and Sadaso is, for example, Machi's skill and accuracy to actually transmute her aura into such a fine shape. While that could very well be the case, since both Machi's threads and Gon's scissors exhibit properties their solidified aura wouldn't normally have, I'm choosing to view them as the missing link between pure aura augmentation and proper substance transmutation, similarly to Shikomono's emitted soldiers being the missing link between emitted projectiles and proper Nen beasts. At level 3, we have the aforementioned substance transmutation. As stated above, by substance transmutation, I'm referring to what most people think when they think of transmutation. Hatsu like Killua's electricity, Phaeton's rising sun, Genthru's little flower, Hisoka's bungee gum, and Moral's deep purple. If his smoke is indeed transmuted and not conjured, that one's kind of iffy. See, unlike conjuration, which actually materializes objects or substances, transmutation, through its innate mechanic of substance transmutation, merely allows its users to mimic certain properties. As in, Hisoka doesn't actually create any rubber or gum with his bungee gum. His aura merely mimics the properties of rubberiness and gumminess. However, since this requires the nature of one's aura to change, I view it as fundamentally different and more innately complex compared to what Sadaso, Gon, and Machi do. Now, level 3 is only the baseline, and I believe that the level of complexity increases depending on what substance is being transmuted. In order to transmute aura into a particular substance, one must be deeply familiar with it. This, plus the more dynamic states of certain substances or effects, logically make it so that it's easier to familiarize yourself with some than others. This was why Bisky and others claimed it was both incredibly impressive and tragic that Killua could transmute electricity at such a young age, as it implied that he was intimately familiar with its properties. As such, Moral's Deep Purple would be a great example of a level 3 transmutation-based Hatsu, since smoke doesn't seem particularly difficult to learn to transmute. Deep Purple is of course insanely more multi-categorically complex and is of a higher level, but we'll get to that when I eventually cover manipulators in this series. For now, I'm only rating the transmutation part of it. Again, supposing it is transmutation. Killua's electricity would fall at a level 4, if all he did was transmuted to elicit Hatsu like Lightning Palm and Thunderbolt, which are essentially the same Hatsu, just with increased aura output, force, and accuracy. Please note that Thunderbolt most likely does not utilize emission, since the transmuted aura is still attached to Killua. Now, Killua's Godspeed is where things get complex. Godspeed allows Killua to bypass his nervous system by programming the electricity coursing through him to immediately react to outside stimuli with a pre-programmed response. This makes Godspeed quite multi-categorically complex, as it relies on both enhancement to boost Killua's physical traits so as to not overly strain or even injure his body while moving at speeds that should be impossible for him. He was designated as an enhancement midpoint transmuter, so this makes sense, and some relatively low-level manipulation to program his transmuted aura to respond to certain specific stimuli in a certain specific way. To put it in perspective, while a manipulator like Shalnark can proactively attack with his enhancement-based but manipulation-facilitated autopilot mode, a transmuter like Killua, for whom manipulation is his opposite category, can only program his Nen to react to certain external stimuli in a certain specific way, and only when said stimuli is within a very short radius. All in all, I'd rate Godspeed at a very solid level 6, if not even a weaker 7 on the Hatsu complexity scale. Moving on, Phaeton's Rising Sun entails him transmuting his aura into heat, with the condition that the ability is more potent based on his level of injury and thus level of seething. Transmuting aura into heat would be another level 4 Hatsu if that's all he did. However, apart from doing that, Phaeton also utilizes very basic emission to detach the scorching aura from himself, as well as conjuration to conjure Painpacker, the armor that allows him to withstand the heat of rising sun. This is probably a good place to emphasize that transmuters are in general not immune to the properties their aura mimics. Without his magical assassination training, Killua's Thunderbolt would need to actually be emitted before it's transmuted to electricity, and Godspeed would just be impossible since he'd just be convulsing on the ground like he was struck by the Chinese electric Batman himself. Getting back to the Chinese fiery Batman, since the only apparent purpose of Phaeton's Painpacker armor is to protect him from rising sun, I'm choosing to view them as two parts of one whole. By the way, conditions for ability activations neither raise nor lower an ability's level. I'll get into that with some of the other categories. Meaning that the purpose of Phaeton's counteractive-esque activation condition for Painpacker and Rising Sun, i.e. damage sustained, is solely there to boost its force or power. And I'd actually say it's primarily there to empower the armor, not the sun. I say that because the armor is conjuration-based and would therefore need a boost in order to keep up with the sheer power of Phaeton's transmutation-based ball of hell. Plus, the transmuted blaze is called Rising Sun, while it is named Painpacker. I think it makes sense. All in all, due to its multi-categorical complexity, I'd rate Phaeton's Hatsu at a very strong level 6. Then we have Hisoka and his bungee gum, which has the properties of... you know damn well what properties it has. Now, if bungee gum entailed transmuting either rubber or gum individually, I would have put it at a level 3 alongside moral smoke. However, since it's actually a kind of hybrid of the two, I'll be putting it at a very strong level 4. The reason I wouldn't go higher is because there is a strong overlap between the properties of rubber and gum as substances, so learning to transmute one would go towards learning to transmute the other as well, in my opinion. In any case, Hisoka's Hatsu is supposed to be relatively simple on the face of it, with its true complexity arising from Hisoka's masterful skill and ingenuity with it. Then we have Genthru. Alright, I am not going to spend a second more on this fart knocker than I have to, since I've already gone into detail about just how stupid his transmutation-based little flower is in my top 5 worst than abilities video. All I must say is that the dipshit doesn't conjure any gloves to protect himself from his own explosions, but just raw dogs it by coating his hands in pure aura, like the smooth-brained jackass he is. That said, transmuting explosions is definitely one of the baseline most complex substance transmutations we've seen. While something like heat or electricity is something you can get used to by slowly ramping up the temperature and wattage respectively, explosions aren't as scalable, let's say, and by definition exist in a much more dynamic state than either heat or electricity. As such, I'd say they'd be quite difficult to transmute, which would put Little Flower at a level 5 just based on its degree of innate complexity. An excellent transition from Genthru's Little Flower is Yuppie's Rage Blast, which essentially comes down to the same thing, just on a much grander scale. As you could have guessed from the name though, there's an even greater emphasis on rage than even with Phaeton's Rising Sun, which is genuinely impressive because the boy's brain fries from seething so hard he starts talking in tongues. Now, I played with the idea of Yuppie literally transmuting his rage into an explosion, but that really makes no sense. Aura or Nen is already so intrinsically tied to one's emotions that there's really no way to separate one from the other. Being more bestial than some of the other ants, Yuppie's rage was simply the driving force behind his power, with his character arc revolving around him learning to control it and, ironically, becoming even more bestial in appearance as a consequence. But we'll get to that in a bit. I'd put Rage Blast at a level 5 as well. The final and most complex entry in the substance transmutation type is none other than Bisky's Cookie-chan. Cookie-chan has the ability to transmute aura into various lotions that can do anything from relieving fatigue and burning off extra fat to curing fucking arthritis. That's not all though. Cookie-chan also has various massages, which can do things like making 30 minutes of sleep equivalent to 8 hours, while relieving physical and mental fatigue and accelerating aura restoration. Now, the lotion in question very obviously isn't an actual substance Bisky's aura mimics, since it's too miraculous to actually be real, but is most likely an abstracted notion of lotion, and the curative properties many of them possess taken to absurd levels thanks to Bisky's extreme, literally, proficiency in transmutation. This alone would have put Cookie-chan at a very solid level 5+. However, apart from the lotion, we need to take into account Cookie-chan's massages, which involve delicate manipulation, her ability to aid recovery of not only physical and mental fatigue, which almost certainly involves enhancement along with transmutation, as well as the fact that Cookie-chan is a conjured and manipulated Nen beast as a baseline. All this makes it so that, believe it or not, Bisky's Cookie-chan is a contender for the most complex transmutation-based Hatsu we've seen. Due both to its innate and multi-categorical complexity, I'd feel comfortable putting it anywhere between a 9 to even a full-on 10. From substance transmutation, we move on to the more innately complex mechanic of body/object malleability. Body/object malleability can be viewed as the precursor to proper body/object transfiguration, which we'll cover last. Similarly to how level 1 aura shaping is used to shape emission-based Nen beasts, this more advanced mechanic of transmutation is used as a secondary mechanic to make possible certain, this time around, conjuration-based Hatsu. Specifically, and most commonly, those that shape a user's body part, or even entire body, into something completely different. For body part, think Padale's fistful of weapons, or Ikalgo's fleedom. And for the whole body, think Tsubone's rider's high, or Curtain's unseen Hatsu. See, I do not believe it makes sense for conjuration, even advanced applications of it, to allow a user to alter or change the properties of already existing things, such as other objects or one's body. Instead, this effect must be facilitated by either transmutation or manipulation. Since conjuration and transmutation are adjacent to one another, I'm more inclined to think that transmutation is used with the majority of shape-changing abilities used by conjurers and transmuters. The difference between body malleability and proper body transfiguration, which we'll talk about in a bit, is that all body malleability does is make a specific part or object, well, malleable. From there, conjuration does most of the heavy lifting to make a particular Hatsu possible. As such, a large part of these body alteration Hatsu can be said to be around 5 to 20% transmutation and 95 to 80% conjuration, depending on whether we're talking about partial or full body malleability. This, since conjuration is still primarily responsible for creating Padale's various melee weapons, Ikalgo's gun, and Tsubone's various body parts, while transmutation is just there to facilitate the integration of said parts within one's body. By the way, the difference between partial and full body malleability would be one of degree and not of kind. In other words, it'd be a difference in aura output, force, and accuracy, not level. Now, if you aren't convinced and think this is way too headcanon-y, please note that A, while it was omitted from the Viz translation, in chapter 329, it was outright stated that Tsubone conjures various vehicle parts and integrates them within her body, and that B, she was designated by Togashi as a transmutation midpoint conjurer. As we continue on, you'll notice how the majority of characters that showcase some kind of body alteration are either transmuters or conjurers. All in all, I'd put body malleability at just barely level 4 with regards to its complexity, i.e. just slightly above the baseline level of substance transmutation. I don't think it makes sense to put it any higher since 1, we have seen it being used by some relatively low-level Nen users, and 2, if it were any more complex than this, it wouldn't make sense why conjurers would won't even bother implementing it, instead of just conjuring the weapon or vehicle in question. The final large type of transmutation-based abilities is body/object transfiguration. Now, I know a bunch of you clenched your butts when I first said that, but yes, I still maintain that transmutation is quite capable of altering not just men, but physical objects. However, it's important to keep in mind that the same or similar effect can be accomplished through more than one category. For example, just how creating Nen beasts is, in my opinion, possible through both conjuration and emission, or how things like threads can be both conjured or transmuted, I too believe that body/object alteration can be accomplished through more than one category, with transmutation being the one which most excels at it. Just like with malleability, we can delineate between partial and total body transfiguration. Partial body transfiguration allows its users to alter the properties of a segment or portion of their body. The Shadow Beast's own disgusting little man rodent, codenamed Porcupine, would be a good example of this. He is a transmuter with the ability to change the length and property of his body hair, to either make it sharp enough to pierce straight through Uvo's extremely durable fist, or even soft enough to cushion a blow from Uvo attempting to crush him. The only other category that could account for this kind of ability would be manipulation, but since that would be Porcupine's opposite category, supposing Togashi hasn't retroactively changed his category in the meantime, I feel confident in asserting that this was done via pure transmutation. As such, I'd rate both Porcupine's Hatsu as well as body transfiguration, be it partial or total, since again there are differences in degree, as a baseline level 5. A great example of total body transfiguration would be Yuppie's metamorphosis, supposing it is a proper Hatsu, which allows him to alter the shape of his entire body to sprout wings, spawn multiple eyes, morph his arms into tentacles, shapeset tentacles into razor-sharp blades, and so on. Even if it is a proper Hatsu, this type of body transfiguration was definitely facilitated by his Chimera Ant biology and status as a purely magical beast, Chimera Ant, and would have necessitated conjuration as well had he been a regular human. This makes it very difficult to give it a complexity rating, since changing his body seems like second nature to this chimera among chimeras. Since it is so incredibly versatile, I'll go ahead and give it a 6, but I can think of valid arguments for both lowering and increasing it by a level. As the most innately complex mechanic of transmutation, we have permanent total body transfiguration. Similarly to how I delineated temporary from permanent aura/Hatsu synthesis last video, I also believe that the difference between temporary and permanent body transfiguration is one of kind and not simply degree, requiring a much higher innate complexity and thus mastery. Think Bisky's body transformation or Yuppie's rage incarnate form. While Bisky can turn her form off and on at will, Yuppie's rage incarnate seems to have become his new default. It's interesting that they almost serve the opposite purpose, with Yuppie's form serving to empower him at the cost of him looking more monstrous, while Bisky's transformation nerfs her while making her appear arguably cuter. Though beauty is in the eye of the beholder, isn't it, Vergay? Anyway, I'd rate Yuppie's rage incarnate as well as permanent total body transfiguration itself at a very strong 8. I wouldn't go any higher, since despite everything he went through, Togashi still designated Yuppie as natural on the Nen proficiency scale. On the other hand, I'd actually rate Bisky's lollification at a 9, since she can turn it off and on at will, and we know from chapter 405 that changing one's size is quite the rare feat, apparently, for a human, that is. And Bisky's is almost as drastic a transformation as you can get without relying on conjuration. To level 9 plus Hatsu. If you perchance needed any more proof Bisky isn't just a quiet yet tyrannical hamstring, there you go. And that's that. A few observations before we move on to the outro proper. 1. Transmuters are apparently the second rarest Nen type featured in the series, hence why I had to include so many non-transmuters using transmutation as either a core or supporting Hatsu mechanic. While transmuters may be a rare sight in the series, transmutation definitely is not. 2. Apart from there not being a lot of transmuters, there's also the issue of some, like Hanzo, Metvir, or Worm, not having showcased any transmutation at all. 3. Speaking of Worm, where to even start with him? Does he look like this naturally, or is this a case of permanent total body transfiguration? Considering that would entail a level 8 Hatsu at a minimum, I really don't want to imagine this Worm as having accomplished something on the level of Yuppie or Bisky with absolutely nothing to show for it. I guess it's possible he looked like that naturally and transmuted the ground around him to allow him to dig quicker. I don't know. This is a world where Beans, Cutie Beauty, and this guy are seemingly normal humans, so who knows. With that said, as always, thank you very much for watching, your feedback is always appreciated, subscribe if you'd like more content like this. I'd like to once again thank Kamaswami and Matt B for going the extra mile in supporting the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.